Right now, as you were listening to this, close to 70% of the people sitting in local jails across the United States have not been convicted of a crime.
Yeah, it's a staggering number.
I mean, think about that for a second. That is actual data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics for mid-year 2024. 69% of the jail population is legally innocent.
Right. They're awaiting court action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yet they are sitting in a cage, wearing a jumpsuit, eating off a tray, completely disconnected from their families, their jobs, their lives. So the immediate question that just hits you is, well, why?
Right. How does that happen?
How does a system built on the bedrock presumption of innocence end up locking up mostly unconvicted people? We tell ourselves that justice is blind, that the scales are perfectly balanced, but when you look at the raw, terrifying math of the system, that idealized picture just shatters.
It forces a profound reevaluation of everything we assume about how the law actually operates in this country.
Yeah.
And the contrast between, the soaring constitutional promises we memorize in high school civics and the gritty mechanical reality of a county jail. It's just staggering.
Which brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. Welcome in, everybody. If you are here, it's because you aren't satisfied with surface-level explanations.
Exactly.
You have that drive to learn how the machinery actually works under the hood. You want to understand the architecture of the systems that govern us. Today, we are unpacking a single, incredibly dense, and frankly provocative essay simply titled EqualProtection.pdf.
It's a fascinating document.
It really is. The goal here is to completely deconstruct the American justice system, starting downstream in the local county holding cells and courtrooms, and then tracing the structural flaws of that system all the way upstream to the United States Constitution itself.
Right, going from the local jail all the way to Washington.
Exactly. We're going to look at the election of federal lawmakers and ask a very dangerous question. Does the American criminal justice system fundamentally confuse minimum representation with actual equal protection?
It is a massive intellectual undertaking. I mean, the essay argues that the system is broken not by accident, but by structural design.
Right.
And it does this by meticulously tracing the life cycle of a criminal case, and then pivoting to examine the lawmakers who build the arena in which that case is fought.
Before we jump into the deep end of this text, I want to add a very important note for you listening. This source material touches on some highly charged, politically sensitive topics.
Very much so.
We are going to be discussing campaign finance doctrine, the criminal justice system, constitutional amendments, and the structure of federal elections. I want to be incredibly clear. Our goal today is to impartially explore the arguments presented by the author.
Hey, we aren't taking sides here.
Exactly. We're not taking political sides, left or right. We are not endorsing any specific political viewpoint or candidate. We're looking at this text purely as an analytical tool to understand some profound structural claims about how power and law operate in America.
We are just tracing the author's blueprints to see how the pieces fit together.
Exactly. Just looking at the mechanics.
And to understand those blueprints, we have to start by completely redefining what equal protection actually means in practice.
Right.
The author forces us to strip away the rhetorical shine of the 14th Amendment and look at the actual gears turning in the courtroom.
Okay, let's lay the groundwork for that. When we talk about equal protection, we are usually pointing to the 14th Amendment.
Right.
The text of the Constitution gives a very clear command. No state may deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws.
And then you combine that with the Sixth Amendment.
Right, which guarantees the right to have the assistance of counsel for your defense. Most of us know the historical milestones here. You have Gideon v. Wainwright.
Oh, absolutely. The landmark Supreme Court case.
Yeah, where a man named Clarence Earl Gideon handwrote a petition to the Supreme Court from his prison cell.
Which is still wild to think about.
I know, right? And that led to the ruling that the state absolutely must provide a lawyer to a defendant who cannot afford one.
Right. And then later, you have Strickland v. Washington, which essentially added the caveat that this state-provided lawyer actually has to be legally effective.
Right, you can't just prop up a sleeping attorney in the courtroom and call it a day.
Exactly. The counsel has to meet a standard of reasonableness.
So those are the foundational pillars of modern criminal procedure. If you read the case law, the system appears to have built a robust fortress around the accused.
On paper, yes. But the essay makes a critical observation.
Right.
The system has created a profound illusion. It equates the paperwork of representation with the moral and constitutional reality of equal protection. The author calls this the completed docket illusion.
Okay, let's unpack this completed docket illusion because I found this concept fascinating.
It really changes how you look at the courts.
It does. The completed docket is basically the official record of a case. The court clerk is looking at a checklist. Did the defendant have a lawyer present? Yes, name is on the line.
Was a plea formally accepted by the judge? Yes, signature is on the form.
Right. Does the sentence fall within the statutory range written by the legislature? Yes, the math checks out. The system looks at that completed docket and says, look, we gave this person equal protection. The procedural skeleton is intact.
But a procedural skeleton only proves that a sequence of events occurred. It proves a lawyer breathed the air in the same room as the defendant. It proves a form was stamped. It does not prove that the defendant was genuinely protected from the awesome crushing power of the state in a manner equal to a citizen with vast resources.
Yeah.
The language of the 14th Amendment is a command for substantive equality of protection, but the system processes it as a command for administrative completion.
Let me try out an analogy here to see if I'm getting the physics of this argument right.
Go for it.
Imagine the Constitution promises every citizen a shield to defend themselves in an arena against the state.
Oh.
The system gives a wealthy person a massive state-of-the-art titanium riot shield with reinforced grips. Then it turns to a poor person and hands them a shield made out of wet cardboard.
Oh, wow.
Technically, an administrator can look into the arena, point at both people and say, well, what's the problem? We fulfilled the requirement. They both have shields. The docket is complete.
Right.
But the person holding the wet cardboard is going to be absolutely crushed. You have provided a shield, but you have not provided equal protection.
That is the exact dynamic. You've met a minimum standard, a constitutional floor, while completely ignoring the massive disparity in the actual architecture of defense.
Yeah.
And the author expands this critique by introducing what they call the whole machine principle. This is really crucial to understanding the essay.
Okay, what's the whole machine principle?
Well, when a person is accused of a crime, they do not experience the state as a series of disconnected, independent offices. They experience the state as one unified, monolithic entity.
Right. Capital S, the state.
Precisely. The state is the legislature that drafted the criminal code. It is the county commission that decided the budget for the public defender's office.
The police department that gathered the evidence.
Exactly. It is the prosecutor who decides which charges to file. It is the judge who sets the bond amount. It is the jailer who holds the physical body of the accused. And it is the clerk who stamps the final paperwork.
So from the perspective of the defendant, this is all one giant machine coming down on their head.
Yes, but the people operating the machine don't see it that way at all. The essay points out how the state legally divides itself into tiny, compartmentalized pieces to entirely avoid responsibility for the final unequal outcome.
Oh, that makes so much sense. The lawmaker in the state capitol says, I didn't convict anyone, I just wrote the statute.
Right. The prosecutor says, I don't set the budget for the defense, I just apply the law to the facts.
The judge says, I don't decide what charges are brought, I just manage the trial and follow the sentencing matrix.
And the jail administration says, we don't weigh guilt or innocence. We just securely house the inmate sent to us.
So everyone passes the buck.
Exactly. And that fragmentation is the magic trick of the system.
How so?
Well, if every single one of those distinct offices contributes just one tiny unequal piece to the process, a slightly underfunded defense here, a slightly coercive jail environment there, a heavily leveraged charging document over there, and every official claims they strictly follow the rules of their specific narrow job, the final product is massively unequal.
Yeah, but nobody has to take the blame for it.
Exactly. Yet because every individual step adhered to an administrative rule, the system launders that inequality through constitutional language and labels the final result justice.
It's essentially an assembly line of degradation.
That's a great way to put it.
Every station on the factory floor adds a tiny microscopic flaw to the product. But because the worker at every station checked their specific quality control box on the clipboard, the factory manager holds up a completely broken product at the end of the line and insists it was manufactured perfectly.
Yes.
The system uses procedural compliance to mask structural inequality.
Which naturally leads us to examine the actual physical gears of this assembly line. If the theory is that the whole machine produces unequal outcomes, We have to look at the environment where a defendant first encounters that machine.
Right, before the trial even starts.
Yes. And it is vital to recognize that America does not have one monolithic criminal justice system.
Right. The essay is very clear that we operate thousands of different punishment machines under one constitutional flag. We have a federal system, 50 distinct state systems, and within those states, countless county and municipal jurisdictions.
The author cites findings from the United States Sentencing Commission to illustrate this fragmentation.
What did they find?
The Commission's data proves that even within the unified federal structure, where the laws are the same, the Constitution is the same, and the sentencing guidelines are meant to be uniform, there are massive interdistrict differences.
Wait, really? Even at the federal level?
Yes. A federal defendant facing a specific drug charge in a district in the Northeast might receive a radically different sentence than a defendant facing the exact same charge with the exact same criminal history in a district in the South.
That blows my mind. Because the usual defense for massive disparities in state law is federalism. We always say, well, Texas is allowed to write different laws than California. That's the laboratory of democracy.
Right.
But the Sentencing Commission data shows that even when the law is entirely federal, the outcome changes simply based on geographic location. You can have the exact same accusation, the exact same constitutional rights, but if you cross a district line, the machine processes you differently.
The author argues that federalism is an explanation for how the system is structured, but it is not a moral justification for unequal protection.
Right, those are two very different things.
Exactly. If the 14th Amendment is a national guarantee, but the local environment produces radically divergent levels of protection based on the local political climate or judicial culture, then you are fundamentally not standing before the same legal machine.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But let's zoom in on the most visceral, immediate mechanism of this inequality. Before a trial ever begins, before a jury is ever impaneled, the system establishes a brutal economic filter. We have to talk about bail and bond.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The essay refers to the bond system as protection for sale.
Yes.
And this is where the wet cardboard shield analogy really hits the pavement. Let's walk through the diverging paths of two defendants.
Okay, lay it out.
Say defendant A has financial resources. When the judge sets a $50,000 bond, defendant A pays it. They walk out the front door of the jail. They go home. They sleep in their own bed. They wake up. They go to their job. They pay their mortgage. Most importantly, they sit at their dining room table with their private attorney, drinking coffee, reviewing discovery documents, tracking down alibi witnesses, and building a comprehensive defense from a position of absolute stability and physical health.
Now, contrast that with defendant B.
Exactly. Defendant B faces the exact same charge, but has no savings. The judge sets the same $50,000 bond. Defendant B cannot pay it.
So they are instantly transferred to a holding cell.
Yep. Their pretrial defense is fundamentally compromised before it even begins. They are fighting the state from inside a cage. They do not show up for their shift the next day, so they lose their job.
And because they lost their job, they miss rent and they lose their housing.
Right. Their family structure is destabilized, the physical health declines due to the conditions of the jail, and their mental clarity degrades under the constant stress of incarceration. They cannot freely contact witnesses.
Their only interaction with their overloaded public defender might be a 15-minute conversation through thick glass.
Or just a brief whisper in the hallway of the courthouse.
The system calls bond a neutral appearance mechanism.
Yep.
The official line is, "We just need some financial leverage to guarantee you show up for your court date."
But the essay shatters that defense. If the practical, real-world effect is that your physical freedom and your ability to mount a defense depend entirely on the balance of your bank account, then poverty has been transformed into a pre-trial punishment.
Exactly. The state is punishing you for being poor before it has ever proven you are guilty.
And this brings us back to that staggering statistic you opened with. The Bureau of Justice Statistics data from mid-year 2024 showing that 69% of the local jail population is unconvicted.
It's just wild.
It is, because the jail is not a neutral waiting room where you sit quietly reading old magazines until the judge is ready for you. The essay frames the local jail as a highly engineered pressure cooker.
Yes.
It is an environment that actively dismantles a person's psychological and physical resilience.
Right. The author uses a phrase, "The cage changes the case."
Oof, that is a direct quote from the text, and it is haunting. The cage changes the case.
It really is.
Because the longer you sit in that pressure cooker, the less you care about vindicating your innocence, and the more you care about just stopping the pain of incarceration. How does this actually warp the legal process? I mean, if we look at the data, what happens to people who are held pre-trial versus people who are released?
The outcomes are drastically different, and the essay leans on extensive research from organizations like the Vera Institute of Justice and the National Bureau of Economic Research, the NBER, to prove it.
What does the data actually show?
The data shows that pretrial detention significantly increases the probability of a conviction. And here's the critical mechanism. It increases convictions primarily by inducing guilty pleas, not by producing trial verdicts.
Let's really break down the mechanics of that. You are in a violent, overcrowded, unsanitary, and deeply isolating environment. You haven't seen your kids in weeks. You know your apartment is about to be evicted. And the prosecutor sends a message through your lawyer. If you sign this piece of paper admitting guilt to a lesser charge, I will recommend time served, and you can walk out of this building today.
Right.
Even if you are entirely innocent, even if the state's evidence is incredibly weak, the rational survival choice in that moment is to plead guilty. You are capitulating to the environment, not to the facts.
Exactly. And then the system performs a horrifying administrative ritual. You're brought before the judge. The judge looks at you and asks the mandatory procedural questions. Are you pleading guilty voluntarily? Has anyone threatened you or coerced you into making this plea?
And because you want to go home, you say, yes, Your Honor, this is voluntary.
Right. The judge accepts the plea. The completed docket elution is achieved. The paperwork officially declares that the plea was an exercise of your free will.
Wow.
But the reality is that the plea was entirely shaped by the architecture of coercion. You sign the form because immediate release or stopping the bleeding of your life became more urgent than testing the state's evidence at trial.
Yeah. The legal record says voluntary. The physical environment says heavily coerced.
Right.
That completely flips the constitutional right to a trial on its head. The right to a trial by a jury of your peers is supposed to be the ultimate shield against tyranny.
Exactly.
But in this system, exercising that right means staying in the cage for months or even years waiting for a trial date. The system turns the right to a trial into an incredibly dangerous financial and physical risk that only wealthy people, sitting safely in their living rooms, can afford to take.
Which shifts our focus to the human actors operating inside this system. Once you are trapped in this machinery, your life is heavily dependent on the lawyers, prosecutors, and judges managing your docket.
Right.
Let's look closely at the defense side first. The text cites a massive undertaking by the American Bar Association, the National Public Defense Workload Study. And the author is incredibly careful here to draw a moral distinction between the structure of the system and the people working within it.
Yes, I want to emphasize that because it's a vital point. The essay goes out of its way to state that public defenders are not the villains of this story.
Not at all.
In fact, they are often incredibly courageous, brilliant, deeply committed attorneys who possess far more actual courtroom trial experience than attorneys in fancy corporate law firms.
Oh, absolutely.
The critique in this text is not about the skill, intelligence, or moral worth of the public defender. The critique is aimed entirely at the structural design of the system that employs them.
Right. The flaw is the intentional underfunding and overloading of the public defense function. The ABA workload study proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that public defense systems across the country are operating with wildly excessive caseloads.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if your lawyer is a legal genius. If they're assigned 300, 400, or 500 active felony and misdemeanor cases a year, they simply do not have the hours in the day to effectively investigate every single one.
They just physically can't do it.
No, they do not have the massive budgets to hire private investigators to track down elusive witnesses. They do not have the discretionary funds to hire independent forensic experts to challenge the state's crime lab.
The essay uses a phrase that just stops you in your tracks. Private defense is a market. Public defense is a budget.
That's it exactly.
If you are wealthy, you enter the legal market. You can hire an entire army of attorneys, paralegals, jury consultants, and retired police detectives to dismantle the state's case brick by brick. You can buy the titanium shield.
Right.
But if you are poor, you get whatever finite amount of money the local county commission decided to allocate to the public defender's office that fiscal year.
And this exposes a profound contradiction in modern legal doctrine. The current Supreme Court doctrine explicitly accepts that absolute equality is not required by the Constitution.
Wait, really? It explicitly says that.
Yes, the law openly acknowledges that a defendant with immense resources has the right to hire the counsel of their choice and mount a superior defense. But the essay forces the reader to confront the moral consequence of that doctrine.
Okay.
If we universally accept that having an attorney is essential to a fair trial, which is the entire premise of the Sixth Amendment and the Gideon ruling, and we simultaneously allow wealthy citizens to purchase vastly more legal firepower than poor citizens, we are openly conceding that fairness scales with wealth.
I have to ask, how does the system justify that? Because the state comes into the courtroom with a staggering power. They have massive police departments, sophisticated state crime labs, digital forensics teams, specialized prosecutorial divisions, and the institutional memory of prosecuting thousands of cases.
To be exact.
They have effectively unlimited resources compared to the individual. Putting a poor defendant represented by one brilliant but hopelessly overloaded public defender up against the entire apparatus of the state? That isn't a fair fight, it's a slaughter.
The author argues that this dynamic proves we do not have equal protection. We have a constitutional floor masquerading as equal protection.
Yeah.
The state provides just enough representation to make the conviction legally valid, but entirely fails to provide the systemic equilibrium required for true justice. And this imbalance of power is supercharged by the role of the prosecutor.
Let's talk about the prosecutors.
We tend to view the law as an automatic process. A crime happens, the police investigate, and the specific statute simply dictates the charge. But the Vera Institute's analysis of prosecutorial discretion shatters that myth.
Right. Prosecutors wield an almost unimaginable level of discretionary power. They are the gatekeepers of the machine. They alone decide whether to file charges at all, which specific statutes to invoke, whether to add sentencing enhancements, and what plea deals to offer.
Yes.
And the essay explores how prosecutors use this leverage to engineer guilty pleas through a tactic known as charge stacking.
Charge stacking is the practice of taking a single criminal event and dividing it into as many separate statutory violations as legally possible.
How does that work in practice?
Well, a single altercation might become assault, battery, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, and fleeing the scene. The prosecutor builds a towering cliff of potential prison time.
Right.
The sheer height of that cliff is designed to terrify the defendant. The prosecutor then approaches the defense and says, "If we go to trial and you lose, I will ask the judge to sentence you consecutively on all these counts, and you will spend 30 years in prison.
Oh, man.
But if you plead guilty today to just one of these charges, I will drop the rest, and you'll only serve 2 years."
It's an incredible application of leverage, and the text points to a very specific, chilling Supreme Court case that legalized this extreme form of coercion. Bordenkircher v. Hayes. I want to unpack this case because the mechanics of it are deeply disturbing.
Right.
What exactly happened in Bordenkircher, and how does it dictate how the machine operates today?
So, Bordenkircher v. Hayes is a foundational ruling from 1978 that essentially blessed the modern plea bargaining system.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Louis Hayes was accused of forging a check for $88.
$88.
Yes, it was a minor offense, punishable by 2 to 10 years in prison. During plea negotiations, the prosecutor offered to recommend a 5-year sentence if Hayes pled guilty.
Okay.
But the prosecutor added a threat. If Hayes refused the plea deal and insisted on his constitutional right to a trial, the prosecutor would return to the grand jury and seek a new indictment under the state's Habitual Criminal Act, because Hayes had 2 prior felony convictions.
Wait, let me make sure I understand. The prosecutor basically said, take 5 years for this forged check, or if you dare to make me try this case in front of a jury, I will use your past record to make sure you get a mandatory life sentence.
Exactly.
Wow.
Hayes refused the plea, went to trial, was convicted, and was sentenced to life in prison.
For an $88 bad check.
Yes. He appealed, arguing that the prosecutor's threat was a vindictive punishment simply for exercising his constitutional right to a trial.
Which makes sense.
The case made it to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled against Hayes. They held that it is not unconstitutional for a prosecutor to threaten a defendant with significantly harsher charges during plea negotiations to induce a guilty plea, as long as there is probable cause that the defendant committed the acts.
So the Supreme Court legally sanctioned the idea that exercising your Sixth Amendment right to a trial can be openly and ruthlessly punished.
Yes.
The plea bargain is framed as a discount, but the reality is that going to trial is heavily penalized. The essay refers to this as the trial penalty.
Right.
The system is so overloaded that it relies on coercing guilty pleas to keep the assembly line moving. If every defendant suddenly demanded their right to a trial tomorrow, the entire justice system would instantly collapse under its own weight.
And you might ask, isn't the judge supposed to act as the neutral referee in all of this, to curb the excesses of the prosecutor and ensure the defendant is treated fairly?
Yeah, that's supposed to be the judge's whole job.
In theory, yes. The judge is the impartial arbiter of the law. But the essay introduces a deeply uncomfortable reality. Judges are human beings operating inside a highly volatile political ecosystem.
Right.
The author cites research from the Brennan Center for Justice, which thoroughly documents how judicial reelection pressures directly distort criminal sentencing.
Because in many states, judges are elected officials. They have to run political campaigns, they have to raise money, they have to run television commercials.
Precisely. And in American local politics, the most potent weapon to use against a judicial candidate is the accusation that they are soft on crime.
Yeah, we've all seen those attack ads.
Exactly. The Brennan Center research shows that as an election year approaches, judges demonstrably issue harsher sentences.
Wait, really? Just because an election is coming up?
Yes. When punishment becomes the language of a political campaign, the defendant standing in the courtroom ceases to be a citizen entitled to equal protection. They become political material. They become a prop in the judge's reelection strategy.
If a judge sentences a defendant to the absolute maximum purely because the judge is afraid of a negative tabloid headline or an attack ad funded by a tough-on-crime political action committee, that judge's neutrality has been completely shattered.
Absolutely.
The machine isn't judging the specific facts of the case anymore. It is judging the local political climate. It is judging the defendant's social standing. And if a wealthy, connected defendant can navigate that political minefield better than a poor, marginalized defendant, equal protection is entirely broken.
We have now mapped out how a person is processed by the machine the first time. We've seen the economic filter of bond, the underfunded defense, the coercive environment of the jail, the extreme leverage of charge stacking, and the political pressures on the judge.
A lot.
But the essay asks us to look deeper. What happens when the machine processes a human being a second time? This brings us to Section 4 of the outline, the record multiplier and the first defense equality rule.
This section completely blew my mind because it challenges a concept that is so deeply ingrained in our justice system that we barely even question it anymore. Recidivist sentencing.
Right.
The idea that if you commit a crime and you have a prior criminal record, the state can and should punish you far more severely for the new offense.
It is the bedrock of the modern sentencing grid. Habitual offender statutes, three strikes laws, prior conviction enhancements. These are universally utilized across jurisdictions. And the author acknowledges that the Supreme Court has repeatedly and forcefully upheld this framework.
Yeah, what are some of the cases they cite?
The text lists a litany of cases. Almendarez-Torres, where the court ruled that a prior conviction is merely a sentencing factor, not a new element of a crime that needs to be proven to a jury.
Oh, okay.
Ewing v. California, which upheld a sentence of 25 years to life under a three-strikes law for stealing golf clubs.
Stealing golf clubs. Wow.
Yeah. And cases like Apprendi and Erlinger, which, while requiring juries to find facts that increase maximum sentences, explicitly carved out an exception, allowing judges to unilaterally use prior convictions to enhance sentences.
The legal doctrine is totally settled. The state is absolutely allowed to use your past against you to amplify your present punishment. But the author completely rejects this doctrine.
Completely.
They argue it is a fundamental violation of the core philosophy of equal protection, and they propose a radical alternative called the first offense equality rule.
The logic behind the first offense equality rule is really rigorous. The author argues that equal protection demands that two human beings facing the exact same present accusation must begin the legal process with the exact same legal weight.
Right.
They must face the same statutory sentencing range, the same bond presumptions, and the same plea leverage. But the moment the system introduces prior conviction enhancements, it abandons equal protection at the starting line.
Let me break this down with an analogy to make sure I'm following. Imagine two people, person X and person Y, are both arrested on the exact same day for the exact same crime, let's say, possession of a controlled substance. Person X has no prior record. The standard sentence is 1 year.
Okay.
Person Y has a prior conviction from 5 years ago. Because of the enhancement statutes, the prosecutor charges person Y as a habitual offender, and the mandatory minimum jumps to 10 years.
Right.
The law is no longer asking, what did this person do today? It is asking, who has the state already labeled this person to be?
Exactly. The state is claiming to prosecute the present act, But in reality, it is using the present act as a jurisdictional hook to punish the person for their status as a previously convicted individual.
I kept thinking of it like a video game. Imagine playing a game where if you fail a level, the game permanently removes half of your health bar for every single subsequent level you play.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
You are no longer playing the same game as the other players. The code of the game itself has been altered to guarantee your failure. The state has essentially created a permanent, inescapable legal caste system. You aren't just defending against the new accusation, you are defending against the massive accumulated weight of the state's label.
And this is where the author introduces the concept of the record multiplier, which brilliantly ties everything we've discussed about the downstream machinery together. Let's trace the origin of that prior record.
Okay, let's do it.
Suppose person Y's first conviction 5 years ago was the result of the systemic inequalities we just mapped out. Person Y was poor, they couldn't afford a $5,000 bond, they sat in a horrific, overcrowded jail for 4 months.
They lost their job.
Right. Their public defender was managing 400 cases and couldn't investigate the arresting officer's history of misconduct. The prosecutor stacked charges to threaten a massive sentence.
And broken and exhausted, person Y took a plea deal just to get out of the cage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that prior record is not a pristine, neutral document proving that flawless, blind justice was administered. It is a document proving that person Y was successfully processed by a broken, unequal machine.
Man, that is so grim. So the record is basically just an artifact of structural inequality.
Precisely. The record is an artifact of structural inequality. But 5 years later, when person Y is arrested again, the state points to that very record as the legal justification to deny them equal protection in the present.
Wow.
The system uses a prior unequal outcome as the mathematical multiplier to generate a new, vastly amplified unequal outcome. The machine multiplies its own prior failures and calls the multiplication justice. Inequality compounds itself through the literal text of the law.
It's a staggering realization. The state divides itself into pieces to avoid moral responsibility, but the individual experiences the entire weight of that compounding machinery crushing them over a lifetime.
It's incredibly heavy.
Now, as incredibly detailed and massive as all of this downstream machinery is, the jails, the public defenders, the prosecutors, the enhanced sentences, the essay makes a massive structural pivot right in the middle.
It really does shift gears.
We've spent the first half of this deep dive exploring the rooms of the constitutional house. But the author insists that to truly understand why the house is broken, we have to travel upstream. We have to look at the people who built the house, who wrote the criminal code, who designed the funding mechanisms for the defense, who built the rules of the cage.
This is where the text transitions from a critique of criminal procedure into a profound analysis of constitutional design and the architecture of federal elections.
Right.
Because the lawmakers who write the rules, the United States senators and representatives, do not just appear in Washington out of thin air. They are the product of a specific constitutional structure.
Yeah.
And the author argues that if the mechanism that selects the lawmakers is structurally corrupted, then the laws they produce are fundamentally, inevitably compromised. You cannot have equal protection downstream if the lawmaking process upstream is captured.
Which means we need to look closely at Article 1, Section 3 of the original United States Constitution, specifically the design of the United States Senate.
Right.
Most people today just assume that senators have always run in massive statewide elections, running television ads and holding rallies. But that was not the original constitutional design, was it?
Not at all. In the original text of the Constitution, Article I stated that the 2 senators from each state were to be chosen by the legislature thereof.
By the state legislature.
Yes, the actual institutional body of elected state representatives meeting in the state capitol. They voted to select the U.S. senators. This was not merely a quirky historical procedure. It was a deliberate, structural mechanism designed to make the Senate the state government's institutional hand inside the federal lawmaking process.
The author performs an incredibly deep textual analysis of the specific qualifications for a senator in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 3. And I want to take our time here because the grammatical nuance the essay points out is fascinating.
It really is brilliant.
The clause says a senator must be 30 years old, been 9 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen.
We are conditioned to read that clause as a simple bulleted checklist. Age requirement, citizenship requirement,
Right.
residency requirement.
Right.
But the author demands that we read it as it was originally written, as one flowing contiguous sentence. The text deliberately juxtaposes the phrase citizen of the United States with the phrase inhabitant of that state.
I kept asking myself while reading this, why does that semantic difference matter? Why go out of your way to call a person an inhabitant of that state rather than a citizen of that state?
It seems minor, right?
Yeah, are we just splitting hairs over prepositional phrases? It sounds like an archaic grammar debate.
It sounds like semantics, but the essay reveals that it is actually a profound commentary on power, accountability, and corruption.
How so?
The author argues that the phrase, when elected, functions as a constitutional threshold. Before the election occurs, the person is merely an inhabitant of the geographic state. But the moment they are elected by the state legislature, they cross a boundary.
Yep.
They become a United States senator. They are chosen for the state. They serve as the state's institutional voice. But the office they occupy is exclusively federal. They are a citizen of the United States.
Which means they do not belong to the state in a possessive-owned sense. The senator is not supposed to be a hollow vessel that carries the state's private donor networks, partisan political machinery, or local mob mentalities into the halls of federal power.
Exactly. The text points to the speech or debate clause in Article 1, Section 6, which grants federal lawmakers immunity for their legislative acts. The author argues that this immunity exists to protect their independent federal function. It shields them from executive branch harassment. But it does not exist to give them a legal cloak to act as a captured instrument for state-level oligarchs or campaign donors. The senator was designed to be insulated from the chaotic, mass-market pressures of state politics because the institutional legislature acted as a buffer.
So if the original design was meant to protect federal lawmakers from being captured by mass-market forces, we arrive at the great constitutional earthquake, the 17th Amendment.
Yes.
How did we get from state legislatures carefully selecting senators in back rooms to the system we have today, where candidates spend hundreds of millions of dollars on statewide television campaigns?
Well, the 17th Amendment, ratified in 1913, shifted the power to select senators away from the state legislatures and gave it directly to the people of the state.
Yeah.
Direct popular election.
Right.
If you read the official history provided by the National Archives and the U.S. Senate website, this amendment is framed as a glorious triumph of democracy. The official narrative is that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, state legislatures were constantly deadlocking.
They couldn't agree on anyone.
Exactly. They were intensely partisan, they couldn't agree on candidates, and U.S. Senate seats were frequently left vacant for months or even years.
And there was massive, blatant corruption. Right, the essay mentions the Lorimer scandal.
Yes, the election of William Lorimer in Illinois in 1909 was the breaking point. It was revealed that Lorimer's supporters had literally handed out thousands of dollars in cash bribes to state legislators to secure his selection to the U.S. Senate.
Wow, just bags of cash.
Literally. The public was outraged. The perception was that the state legislatures were hopelessly corrupt and owned by corporate trusts. The solution pushed by the progressive movement was to bypass the corrupt legislatures entirely and give the power directly to the voters.
And officially, the legal doctrine says this shift is perfectly valid under Article V of the Constitution, which governs the amendment process. The amendment was proposed by Congress, ratified by 3/4 of the states. The text of the Constitution was altered. End of story. But the essay throws a massive wrench into this narrative. The author argues there is a profound, unresolved Article V contradiction here. They use a phrase that really stuck with me. They argue that Article V should not be a self-erasing power.
We have to unpack what the author means by a self-erasing power. Article V contains a very specific, entrenched protection. It states that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate.
Okay.
The standard modern legal interpretation is that equal suffrage simply means equal numerical voting power. As long as Rhode Island has 2 senators and 2 votes and California has 2 senators and 2 votes, equal suffrage is maintained.
But the author challenges that mathematical reading. They argue that equal suffrage was not just about the number of seats in the room. It was inextricably linked to the state's original constitutional mode of participation, the state legislature's institutional hand choosing the senator.
Correct. The author suggests that by changing the selector from the institutional body of the legislature to the sprawling, unorganized mass electorate of the state, the 17th Amendment didn't just tweak a voting rule, it fundamentally altered the nature of the federal government.
It stripped the state governments of their structural defense mechanism in Washington and opened a massive new path for capture.
Exactly.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here because the natural reaction of almost anyone listening to this is going to be resistance. Aren't democratic elections by the people fundamentally a good thing?
Sure, that's the instinct.
Expanding the franchise, letting the people choose their leaders, that is the core narrative of American progress. How can the author frame giving power to the voters as a structural negative? It feels like the essay is attacking the very idea of democracy.
It is a critical pushback, and the text addresses it directly. The author is very clear that this argument is not an insult to the intelligence or the moral worth of the voters. It is not an anti-democratic argument in a philosophical sense.
What is it then?
It is an entirely structural critique of scale and vulnerability.
Vulnerability to what?
Vulnerability to what the author calls structural vote buying. When the selector was the state legislature, you were dealing with a small, defined, institutional body. Yes, as the Lorimer scandal proved, you could illegally bribe them with cash.
Right.
But bribery of 100 people is a discrete, localized, and ultimately prosecutable crime. However, when you change the selector to a mass electorate of millions of people spread across vast geographic areas, you change the physics of the election.
That makes total sense.
A mass electorate cannot be reasoned with in a single room. A mass electorate must be marketed to. They must be saturated with media. They must be steered by emotional, often fear-based narratives. They must be targeted by sophisticated data algorithms and manipulated by continuous political spectacle.
So moving the election to the people essentially moved the gate to the United States Senate out of the State House and into the mass campaign marketplace. And that marketplace runs on one incredibly toxic fuel, money. Mountains and mountains of money.
Precisely. And this is where the constitutional trap closes. Under modern campaign finance doctrine, heavily shaped by Supreme Court cases like Buckley v. Vallejo and Citizens United v. FEC, direct vote buying is obviously illegal.
Right, you can't just hand people cash.
Exactly. You cannot stand outside a polling place, hand a voter a $50 bill, and tell them to vote for your candidate. But under the guise of the First Amendment, the court has ruled that corporations, political action committees, and billionaires can spend utterly unlimited amounts of money to shape the information environment around the voter.
That is such a brilliant and horrifying distinction. The author writes that the system made buying the hand illegal, but fully legalized buying the mind around the hand.
Yes.
You cannot purchase the physical ballot, but you can purchase the television airwaves. You can purchase the social media algorithms. You can purchase the polling data, the branding, the focus groups, and the endless loop of fear messaging that convinces the voter to cast the ballot exactly how you want them to. You are purchasing the conditions of persuasion.
So the 17th Amendment didn't eliminate corruption. It legalized and monetized it at an industrial scale. It monetized the path into the United States Senate.
Wow.
Lawmakers are no longer captured by a bag of cash in a back room. They are captured by the crushing financial realities of the campaign marketplace. A senator today arrives in Washington not as an independent, insulated federal officer chosen by a deliberate legislature, but as a heavily indebted, state-branded political product.
That's a strong way to put it.
They are a product manufactured by the donor networks, super pinks, and party machines that funded their mass media victory. To use the author's framing, the senator has been re-inhabited by the state campaign machine.
Okay, we have to bring these two massive halves of the essay together. We have built an incredibly detailed map here today. Downstream, we have the muddy, broken, terrifying reality of the local justice system.
Overloaded public defenders, coerced plea bargains, defendants held in cages simply because they are poor.
And the compounding machinery of the record multiplier. Upstream, we have a United States Senate that has been structurally captured by the mass campaign marketplace because of the 17th Amendment and modern campaign finance law. How do these two ecosystems connect?
Right.
How do the upstream toxins poison the downstream waters? How does a heavily marketed, captured senator in Washington directly affect the impoverished defendant sitting in a county jail cell?
They connect through the chain of inequality. The senator who won their seat through this money-drenched, spectacle-driven campaign marketplace doesn't just sit in Washington making speeches.
They actually do things.
Yes, they wield real, tangible power over the architecture of the justice system. The Senate confirms every federal judge, from the district courts all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Senate drafts and passes the federal criminal code.
Right.
The Senate funds the massive federal law enforcement agencies. The Senate establishes the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. And the laws and cultural tone set at the federal level inevitably trickle down to heavily influenced state and local systems.
Unequal lawmaking logically creates unequal laws.
And unequally protected law creates unequally protected people. The author's ultimate synthesis is devastating. You cannot possibly have true equal protection downstream in the local courtroom if the law itself was not equally protected from manipulation upstream in the legislature.
Yeah.
If the gate into federal lawmaking is controlled by vast wealth and heavily funded influence networks, the laws that emerge from that gate will inevitably reflect and protect those same interests, while systematically failing to protect those without power or capital. The person sitting in the cage is facing a legal code that was written by a machine that was already bent before the ink was ever dry.
It is an awe-inspiring, almost overwhelming scope when you look at the entire machine humming all at once. The state deliberately divides itself into all these tiny, compartmentalized pieces to avoid moral responsibility. The senator who runs the billion-dollar campaign, the state legislature that writes the habitual offender statute, the prosecutor who stacks the charges, the judge who sets the unpayable bond, the jailer who turns the key on an innocent person. They all point their fingers at each other.
Right. They all say, I am just doing my specific part of the process. I am just following the procedural rules.
But the accused, the person who can only afford the wet cardboard shield, experiences the state as one unified, crushing machine. Equal protection means absolutely nothing if every single component of the protection is deeply, structurally unequal.
If the protection a citizen receives changes based on their bank account, their geographic location, the crushing caseload of their attorney, the brutal conditions of their local jail, the accumulated weight of their prior processing, and the political climate surrounding their judge, then the system is fundamentally not delivering equal protection.
No.
It is, as the text powerfully concludes, the machinery of inequality wearing the language of justice.
I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today. Something that builds directly on the author's demand for a truly equal protective architecture. Let's do a thought experiment.
Okay, let's hear it.
If true equal protection requires the defense's architecture to be just as powerful, robust, and well-funded as the state's architecture, what would happen if a new constitutional rule required public defense systems to be funded, staffed, and equipped dollar for dollar, exactly the same as the police and prosecutors?
That is a staggering hypothetical.
Right. Imagine it. If the state wants to spend $10 million prosecuting a single complex case, utilizing state-of-the-art labs, DNA experts, and dozens of investigators, the defense automatically, by constitutional mandate, receives $10 million to hire their own independent labs, their own expert witnesses, and their own investigative army.
Wow.
Would the vast machinery of the justice system suddenly slow down? Would prosecutors think twice before stacking charges? Would we finally see what true, uncompromised, equal justice looks like?
Or would the entire system simply grind to a halt because, fundamentally, it relies on the efficiency of inequality to keep the assembly line moving?
It is a profound question,
Yeah.
and it forces every single one of us to look past the comforting illusion of the paperwork and examine the actual physical balance of power in our society.
It makes you wonder if we've just been looking at a broken X-ray this entire time, calling the blurry image a clean break while the patient continues to suffer.
Thank you so much for taking this incredibly deep dive with us today. We encourage you to look at the machinery of justice operating in your own community. Go sit in a local courtroom, ask the hard questions about how your local systems are funded, and always, always look past the completed docket. Keep learning, keep questioning everything, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.